Hello, and welcome to Worst Quality Crab, a podcast of Asian American stories and recipes from best quality hearts. I'm your host, Freesia Lee, and of course, joining me is my husband, Sam.
Hello.
This week, we have no special guest. And that's because after two very special Sam episodes, the first one and the last one, it's my turn in the hot seat. So I will be talking about one of my childhood dishes today. Sam is going to be driving that conversation as host. But before that, we just wanted to say a quick thank you. The response so far to the podcast has been amazing. It's more than we could have imagined. And we really just wanted to thank everybody for that. Sam, did you imagine any of this when we first started this project?
No, I think the number of listeners I expected was, something I could count on one hand. And just the amount of positive feedback and excitement from listeners and friends and everyone that we receive is really amazing. Special shout out to friends in Singapore and Indonesia, where we actually charted in those countries. That's really amazing. And I don't know if you can hear, but I'm holding Gemma, our baby, right now. So you might hear some baby noises here and there.
Yeah, she, I guess, is our extra special guest, just not sharing her stories yet. But yeah, the response has been amazing. We've really loved hearing from people about what's resonating with them, particularly from our Asian and our Hapa friends that are really feeling seen and validated and things are resonating with them, and from our non-Asian friends and listeners that are telling us the things that are similar and that really they can relate to from their own cultural and their food stories and their childhoods. It's been really great. And so thank you all for that. Thank you for letting us know what you like. If you would like to share more of what resonates or what you're liking or just your own food stories, we'd love to hear it. You can find us on Instagram at Worst Quality Crab and just get into our DMs. Or if you want to send us an email, you can find us at worstqualitycrabpod@gmail.com. And we'd love to hear from you. With that, I think this is where we do a little switcheroo. Sam, I'm going to kick it over to you, and you can drive the bus, and I will see what it feels like to be on the other side of this. I'm nervous, but let's go.
So, Freesia, I feel like you've been maybe a little bit reluctant to be a guest on the show, and maybe I think the surprising thing for me was that when we were talking about this show, you're like, I don't have any dishes. I can't think of anything.
That is true.
So, what is the childhood dish that you've come up with, and what makes it special?
Before I answer, to back up, I think part of why I was reluctant to, be in the hot seat, and why I always saw myself in this sort of hosting role and not really like participating was because most of my childhood, Chinese food was eaten at a restaurant or takeout from a restaurant, and not really cooked in my home. Go back to episode 1 and you can listen to us talk all about that. And so when I was thinking about this show, I just sort of thought like, oh, I don't have a Chinese recipe or dish that feels, really like nostalgic for me. It is yet another way in which I'm not quite Asian enough. Womp womp. But as we started talking about this, and something that you actually pointed out to me, Sam, was that it doesn't have to be an Asian dish. It kind of just has to be eaten by an Asian person, and it counts for the experience of being Asian in America and growing up. And that really opened up a lot of things for me, and it made me feel more included in my own project. So then I could start to like think of some childhood dishes. And I did actually come up with an Asian one a Chinese one that we'll probably talk about in another episode. But the one I want to talk about today, I'd actually kind of forgotten about until recently when my mom made it again for the first time in many years. And it's moussaka, which is a Greek dish, but her version of it is a vegetarian moussaka. And this was something that I remember eating when I was a kid, like less than 10 years old. For context, I grew up as a vegan vegetarian until I was like 8 or 9.
Why did you grow up vegan vegetarian?
Oh, my dad was vegan. And so my mom also was vegetarian. And then I was too, as a product of being their child. Not a choice that I got to make, when I was a little kid.
Did you have any awareness of this choice that was kind of made for you when you were a kid?
Oh, absolutely. 1000%. Like, I remember being in preschool, and it was this little home daycare preschool situation. Nothing like where our kids go. Shout out Pacific Primary, love you. But I remember being in preschool, and after lunch, all of the kids would get one Starburst. That was like the treat. But Starburst is not vegan. So instead, I would get a Flintstone vitamin.
Oh, man.
And let me tell you, that shit is not the same. That is the most false equivalency possible. And like, I'd never had a Starburst, so I didn't really know.
So delicious.
But I knew. Yeah, no, I knew. I knew I was getting a vitamin and they were getting candy.
So I'm guessing like Starburst has like a pork product in it or something for the chewiness.
Gelatin, yeah. Anyway, yeah. So my mom, would make all of this vegan and vegetarian food when I was a kid, including this moussaka, which I really liked, and it was delicious and it was yummy. And it wasn't like a once a week type of thing because it's pretty labor intensive, but she made it fairly often. And I remember liking it, but also just being like, what is this weird food? Like, it's not Chinese. It's clearly not American. When I bring it to school or I say it out loud, people are like, what are you talking about? But she was into making it and I was into eating it. And she made it again recently and still slaps. Still good.
Where did she kind of get the idea to make this for you?
Oh, that's a great question. And I only found this out recently because I thought that we were going to do this podcast. So I actually asked. I never really thought about it prior. I just sort of thought like she, I don't know, heard about it one day and just was like, I'm going to try this. But it turns out that she took 2 cooking classes from this woman. I assume she was some sort of professional cook or chef or whatever. This woman that had a cookbook and it was all vegetarian recipes. And this was just one that she liked and it stuck. That's it. Yeah, so simple. Just took a cooking class and was like, I'm going to keep making this for 35 years or more, probably, maybe 40. I don't know. I don't know when she took this class, but it's been a long time.
Do you remember her making it as a kid and like, would you get excited for it? Or like, would she tell you that she's making it for dinner and would it be like a happy feeling?
Kind of yes to all of that. I remember I would get excited to eat it. I don't have like specific memories of her like the making process, but I do remember and I know that it's like quite labor intensive. So just to describe the dish, it's like it's really similar to a lasagna in that it's like a lot of things layered. But in this case, it's layers of eggplant, potato. Traditionally, it's like a beef or a lamb ground beef graham meat sauce, and then a bechamel sauce. But in the vegetarian vegan version that my mom made and still makes, she used tofu as a meat substitute. And then it's flavored with like tomatoes and tomato paste, like a cinnamon or a nutmeg. So sort of, like spices, but not spicy. And then this creamy bechamel, which she at the time made, I'm sure, with soy milk, because that was kind of the only dairy alternative milk at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And then the funny thing is she basically made it the same way again when she made it recently, because that's what she likes now.
And how did it taste most recently to you?
Still good. Maybe not quite as good. I think maybe a couple of reasons. Mm-hmm. One, I noticed that she didn't quite take the time and the care that she used to with it. So like you're supposed to like fry or at least bake the eggplant and the potatoes so they get sort of like this golden crispiness to them or a little bit of color on them. Mm-hmm. And when I was eating it this time, I noticed the potatoes were, pretty white, like still a yummy potato, but they didn't have that like golden yumminess to them. And she'd also like run out of tomato paste. And so she just used tomatoes and just kind of the classic ways in which my mom will like, make a change on the fly that's like close enough for her.
Improvise.
Improvise. Yes, thank you. That is the word. She will improvise on the fly, and it's close enough, and she's fine with that. And, I've come to expect it, so it's fine with me too. But was it exactly the Moussaka of my childhood? No, it was not. Was it close enough? Absolutely.
When she made this for you as a child, was it more consistent?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I kind of think that as she's gotten older and she's come to care less, she just is a little more loosey-goosey about things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it's because as she's gotten older, she's sort of been like, it's basically all the same. It comes out close enough. And she's like really leaned into that.
And how do you feel about that?
Sometimes I agree. Like with the Moussaka, I agree. It was fine. It hit in all the ways that I thought it would and wanted it to. In some ways, there are other things that she makes where like the small differences, they seem like small differences to her, but then when they're executed, they actually become really big differences and very noticeable. And I don't always love that because I have come to expect like a certain flavor or a certain texture or whatever. And then it comes out like kind of noticeably different, but still like the same. It's the still same looking casserole, but what has gone into it is like adjacent to the real recipe. And then I'm left a little bit wanting, but that's life.
What do you think inspired her to make this for you again more recently?
In part, it was my birthday, but I think also she's been maybe, I don't know if it's consciously or subconsciously, but she's been on this like greatest hits kick where for some other family gathering we had a couple months ago, she made another one of like the childhood classics. Maybe not like childhood, but maybe like teen era.
Mm-hmm. That was the chili casserole?
Yep, chili casserole. I could do a whole episode of that one because our kids like it now too. It's a whole other thing.
That's pretty good.
That's actually one where she doesn't use exactly the same beans anymore because they're harder to find. And so she uses like whatever she can get her hands on or has on hand, and then it tastes different. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, fine. And that's also one where she started using a beef chili, which she did not in the past. So it's the small differences, which for our kids is fine because they don't know, and so like, yeah, this cheesy and it's beans, yummy. But for me, I'm like, this is like B plus, B plus in nostalgia.
I think as a child, when you're used to a specific dish or a specific flavor and it comes out different, small kids, they throw tantrums at the slightest thing, and like it's like the end of the world. Like they'll cry over it. Like, this is the worst. This is not what it's supposed to be.
Like Sydney eating a hamburger sometimes when it's the different meat.
Yeah, it's like I feel like our kids have like really good taste, or they're developing a palate, which is like a double-edged sword. Like it's cool that they have sophisticated palates, but it's harder to like pull one over on them now.
Oh, 100%. 100%. And I mean, I guess that's what's funny about it too, when I'm like, oh, my mom didn't do it exactly the way I remember, because I pull that shit on our kids all the time, where I'm like, oh, it's close. It's similar yogurt, or it's, whatever. It's frozen hamburger meat defrosted versus the fresh. Like, it's fine. But no, they're not buying that shit.
I guess what I'm getting at as an adult is like, it's inappropriate for you to like cry about it or throw a tantrum. But aside from it, just, you accepting it and being like, oh, this is different. Like, does it draw out any other feelings or emotions for you?
It is unacceptable for me to throw a tantrum, correct. But I do have other feelings about it. Yes. Not in this, like for this dish in particular, but there are other times where, she makes something Jell-O. She makes this Jell-O once a year, and it's my stepdad's mother's recipe. And everybody loves this Jell-O. Like, she used to make it, for all the holidays when she hosted, and then my mom sort of took over making the Jell-O. And she used to like really adhere to the recipe, and it's yummy because it's like a mix of strawberry Jell-O and raspberry Jell-O, and then it's got crushed pineapple and whole cranberries, and it just like comes together really well and it's super yummy. My mom, though, now she's gotten real loosey-goosey with it, and she's like, I just use whatever red Jello I can get. So sometimes it's like cherry Jello. And then sometimes she's like, oh, I didn't have a crushed pineapple, I use a whole one. So then it's like these whole chunks of pineapple, which I don't mind a whole chunk of pineapple, but it doesn't distribute through the Jello the same way. And so like then I just get this like big chunk of cherry Jello and then this big chunk of pineapple. And if someone were to say, like, I'm going to serve you cherry Jello and pineapples, I'd be like, okay, great. But when my mom's like, I made the Jello, and then shows up with not the Jello, I do have a feeling about it. And I have, in fact, said something to her about it before. Only insofar as, like, I did not cry, did not throw a tantrum, but I was like, hey, this tastes different. Could we get a heads up? Because I've got a real expectation here and it is not being met. Maybe that makes me a brat, but if you're going to make the Jello once a year, like just make it the way it's supposed to be. That's my feeling. This is not like a dunk on my mom. I understand why she does this. I fully understand it.
Right.
So my stepdad doesn't like strawberries. So she's like, he doesn't like strawberry Jello. So I have to use something else. I get that. My mom will just like have stuff on hand and she'll use that because she wants to like go through it or she already has it or whatever. I get that too. To her, it's pretty similar. Like for her, she's fine. It's still yummy. It still like checks the Jello box. It has all the right ingredients. Like it's not that she doesn't have like a refined palate or she's just like not particular or whatever, but she thinks it's yummy and it's fine and it will like do the job. Like as I was saying, like I try it on our kids. And so I get it and I fully respect it. But also, if I'm going to like be her kid still, that's when I revert into being like, this isn't the same. I want it my way. Oh, because she was convinced that like no one could tell. And I was like, well, I can tell. And it's still good and I'll still eat it. But just so you know, I can tell. But no, I fully get why she does it. And like, I don't fault her for it. And it was like not to dunk on her in any way. It's just me being like, I'm particular and follow the recipe, blah, 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 blah. Because I do that too. Like when I'm making the one dish per year, like that's when I will go out of my way to be like, well, I have to go get this specific thing. I have to go get these frozen raspberries to make this sauce for whatever. But she just like doesn't have that mentality and that's totally fine. And I get that about her. But it's more just like I don't get the nostalgic hit. It's still good. I just don't get the childhood nostalgic hit that I would if it was exactly the same. And I think that is a big part of eating these things for me is like, it's not that they're not good. It's that the nostalgia doesn't hit the same way. And like, so that part is lost.
I think the first time you mentioned that like your mom made moussaka for you as a kid was during our honeymoon. We like went to Egypt. We were at this restaurant and you ordered moussaka and it came out and it's like this beautiful dish and like so many spices and flavors. And I think it was a meat version.
Yes. It was not our honeymoon. It was our like same year. We had like 2 trips that year. But yes, I remember we were in Egypt. Side note, my grandparents used to run a travel agency. And I don't know how old he was at the time, like 70-something-year-old grandfather arranged that trip to Egypt for us.
As a wedding gift.
And it was a wedding gift, yeah. But it was also with like 30 other people, including my grandparents. Just for anybody that wants to know. We could tell you about traveling with seniors as newlyweds. Anyway, so we went to this restaurant and it was one of our like few meals away. And it was one of the times where we weren't like, let's try Burger King in Egypt to see what that's like.
Which we did.
It's great. And moussaka was one of the things. And I was like, oh, I think I have to get this, like just because. And it was a meat version. And it was the first time I'd ever had the meat version. And it was so good. It was so good. It like still hits really similarly. Like I recognize the flavors, all of the layering, all of the stuff. But it just had that like rich beefiness to it. It was so delicious. It was so good. No shade to my mom's. It's yummy. But what's funny is when I asked her about, why she started making this and learning to make it and things, I also asked if she had ever made a meat version, and she did once, and she made it with lamb because she does like lamb, and my stepdad likes lamb a lot too. And she didn't like it as much. And I think that part of why she didn't like it as much is nostalgia.
Yeah.
I think that she's just so used to making it with tofu, and she's so used to that flavor profile and the texture, and just, it takes her back however many years, that is truly why she likes the tofu one better. I think what's interesting about that is that it really speaks to like how it is hard to separate the nostalgia and sort of the emotion around food from the actual taste and enjoyment of food. Because I think in a blind taste test, if she had never had the tofu one, right, and you gave her tofu or lamb, she probably would like the lamb one better. But the lamb one doesn't mean anything to her.
Yeah.
And so when you stack on all of the meaning and all of like the years of making it and making it for me and knowing that I like it, like tofu wins.
So I grew up eating like tons of meat, beef, chicken, pork, sometimes multiple pork dishes in a single dinner with my mom. What was it like not eating any meat while growing up?
It's sort of the like you don't know what you don't know in some ways, but also, exactly what I said about other kids getting Starburst and me getting Flintstone vitamins. I just sort of always felt like a little bit different, a little bit on the outside. Like people had to make accommodations for me. In my family, I was like on my mom's side, it was just she and I that didn't eat meat. And so we would like go to a Chinese restaurant, and then there was very little that I could eat, or it would just be like, here is your one like vegetable chow fun dish for like a really long time. To the point where I remember one time being like, oh, I don't like chow fun anymore. And my cousin was like, you don't like fun? And he thought he was being funny. Which is, the total like parent joke that we would make today. But at the time I was like, no, I'm tired of eating this because it was like one of the few things. But then, there are also like some things that I really did love. And so like it was never really a problem, but I sometimes sort of felt like it was a problem. And at the time, like dating myself, but like in the 80s, it wasn't cool. This wasn't like everybody's dipping their toe into being a vegan or like raw or whatever, trendy.
Only nerds didn't eat meat.
Basically. Yeah, it wasn't like a cool thing like it is today. And there weren't like a ton of products, and there wasn't a whole, like food trucks and restaurants that are just for like that hashtag vegan life or whatever. So it was a little bit different for me. And I was just like, okay, well, this is, pile on another way in which I'm not quite like everybody else.
That's funny because I would imagine in San Francisco that would like veganism and vegetarianism would be like a little more accepted.
I mean, yes, I certainly had it much easier than if we had grown up in a different place, which is why my mom could take this cooking class from this vegetarian cookbook author. But, it like San Francisco back then wasn't what it is now, certainly. There were like a handful of vegetarian restaurants. And it wasn't like out of the question or like, so crazy, but it still wasn't super mainstream. It wasn't as common. I think I was probably the only vegetarian kid in my class. That alone singles me out in some way. And I don't think I met another vegetarian until I was in middle school, by which time I had started eating meat.
What was your first meat thing that you ate, and how did that make you feel?
I remember this specifically. It was this like Alfredo and ham or bacon pasta at the Olive Garden.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, many things. Of all the things, here's why. It was because I started traveling, and I was traveling with my grandparents, and they basically were like, we don't know how to take her to Europe and not eat meat. It's Europe. And so my mom was like, okay, well, if you want to start eating meat, you can.
How old were you at this time?
I think I was 9.
Okay.
It's sort of like baby-led weaning where you're just like, try a little bit at a time and see how it sticks. I basically picked like a mostly vegetarian dish that had like a little bit of meat in it just to see what it was like. And it was delicious. But yeah, that was the first time that I had meat. And it was so that I could go travel in Europe with my grandparents. And it stuck.
Because they didn't want to bother to try and seek out vegetarian stuff in Europe.
No, absolutely not. No.
Understandable.
Yeah. But I mean, to their credit, like that was probably like 1991, somewhere in there, right? So like, I don't know that traveling in Europe with a vegetarian kid who only speaks English and none of these languages, like that sounds hard.
Yeah, for sure.
So I don't fault them. And now I eat meat. It's delicious.
Going back to Moussaka, would you make that for our kids?
No.
Why not?
Only because it's so much work. Like, I will offer it to them when my mom makes it. We have some in the fridge right now. They're welcome to try it. They won't because eggplants, no thank you. And if I told them tofu, like, also no thank you. But I don't see myself taking this on as a dish that, like, I want to learn or master or make for our kids, just the sheer amount of work that it is. Like you have to make all of these layers separately, much like a lasagna, which is also why I don't make lasagna. It's so many separate components, then you layer and then bake. And it's so time consuming that I just don't have in me. Maybe when they're bigger, I don't know, maybe I'll like get nostalgic for it and I'll want to make it for me. But it's certainly not something that I will go out of my way to make in the hopes that like they also latch onto it. Because I think that if I were to make the vegetarian one for our kids, unless they want us to be vegetarians, which I'm open to that. I don't know. It's one of those like, I kind of got handed this moussaka recipe from her because she liked it. She liked making it and she liked eating it and she's just like, here, we eat this now and I happen to like it and it stuck. And I think that if I were to make this same recipe for them, like I'm kind of handing it to them in a way that I don't necessarily need to, or like they don't necessarily need to pick it up. Because one, we're not Greek. It's not like a family history other than that, like my mom took this cooking class and it stuck. But two, just like, I don't know, I want them to whatever the kid version of taking a cooking class and liking a dish is, right? Like, I know that we talk a lot about what are the food traditions that we want to give our kids and what are the things that we want to hand down. But in some ways, like, I really want that to be organic. And I'm very comfortable with the things that I make that I think they're going to like and then they don't. Like when I make the, once a year corn pudding or whatever, and I think they're going to love it and I love it, but they don't. I'm like, oh, okay, great. That one's not for them, I guess. And so I guess when I think about what are the things that I kind of like want to become nostalgic for them, I want them to be a little more organic and not like force fed. Haha. Very bad pun. But I just want them to like figure out on their own the things that they're gonna like latch onto and not necessarily have them be because I liked it as a kid is the only reason.
It does sound super intricate and time consuming. Do you think it was a factor for your mom making it when you were a kid because you were an only child?
That's a good question. And I sort of wonder like how she did that. And again, I don't remember ever seeing her make it, but I do have this vague sense that like, I was off like playing by myself or something and she could make it. But yeah, I was an only kid. I think I was pretty self-sufficient and independent too. So she could take that on and she just wanted to do it. And I do think in some ways, like there are some things that she is faster in the kitchen at than I am, or she used to be faster in the kitchen.
So we usually include a recipe. What recipe do you think you're going to use for the show? Are you going to ask your mom for her recipe or are you going to like optional meat version? What do you think?
I'm going to ask my mom for a recipe because I think I would like to have it just in case. But what's funny is I was actually looking up vegan moussaka online just to see like what was out there and if I could find one similar to hers. And most of the recipes that I found were substituting in lentils for the meat. At first, I was really surprised that I didn't see like a tofu version, because to me it seems so obvious. Like tofu sort of like scrambles up similarly like a ground meat, and it takes on flavor so well. But then, kind of going back to like how being vegan and vegetarian has become so much more mainstream, lentils have really stepped in as like the meaty substitute, I feel like, in the last handful of years. And like, I don't hate it. I've made some pretty yummy things with lentils in place of meat in the past, but it also started thinking about how like tofu maybe has been like unfairly maligned with soy in the last like decade of like Whole 30s and whatever other things that are like, oh, soy is bad, um and that includes tofu, and then that just feels racist to me. Because tofu is so common in most Asian cuisines. Yeah, so I didn't love that as I was like looking up all these recipes that had lentils in them, and honestly had some feelings of low-key racism. But to answer your question, when we do post a recipe or whatever recipe you've seen by now, listener, thank you. I think it will be as close to my mom's as I can get out of her hands, her mouth, because I'm not sure how much she does measuring at this point, like most moms. And 1000%, the picture that you will see or will have already seen is the one that she made over the weekend, because there is no way I'm making that again and taking a picture of it like all the other dishes that take 30 minutes or less. This one is 100% going to be like the real deal that she made. I can already tell that the photo probably doesn't look that good right now. Apologies, but like, this is what we're working with. And I don't have 2 hours to set aside to make this dish to photograph.
It's worse quality crab, people. I realize
yes.
that, these are quick dishes. These aren't necessarily Instagram friendly, photogenic
No.
dishes and foods that we're talking about here. This is the real deal, people.
Totally. This is the real deal. This is what it looked like on a weeknight, or in its like messy realist form. All of these dishes are like not meant to like be super beautiful. They're meant to feel super beautiful when eaten.
Nice. Freesia, thanks for sharing this dish with us. What was it like being on the guest side of things?
Pretty weird, but fun. It's really interesting to think about, my own food stories and my family, and just share this out knowing that like it's possible that they listen to this. I don't know, probably not. Because who cares? But it's really interesting to go back and think about these childhood food stories and these childhood dishes and look at them from a new perspective, and also to kind of investigate them from this like real place of curiosity, and from kind of like knowing now things about my family and myself that I didn't know then, and also to like really uncover that like I kind of had this story in my head about Moussaka and about like, oh, I was like different and whatever, and why does my mom make these things? Like, we're not Greek, but she doesn't make Chinese food and whatever else. And then learn that like she just took a cooking class and she really liked it. And like, I think that's kind of charming, but it took me a really long time to, know that story and to understand it. And so instead I had this whole like made up thing or whatever in my head, which also makes me wonder, like, what are the things that our kids are going to make up about us around food and how we feed them and the way we cook. But, if I get in my head about that, like, that's a never-ending rabbit hole. But yeah, it's been interesting to be on this side of things, for sure. And I look forward to being back on the other side next time. But thank you all, listeners, for going on this journey with me. If you would like to cook moussaka, some version of it, whatever I end up sharing, definitely vegetarian, you can find a recipe on our website at worstqualitycrab.com, or you can find us on Instagram at worstqualitycrab. And again, if there is something that is resonating with you, if you've got a story that you want to share with us, slide into our DMs, email us worstqualitycrabpod@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. Until next time, thanks so much. Bye, everybody.
Bye bye.